For latest updates, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon.
Chapter 2 of the Customs Act 1962. Chapter 2 talks about officers of customs and contains 4 sections. Section 3, 4, 5 and 6 of the Customs Act. Let us go over the chapter in detail. Section 3 talks about classes of officers of customs. Section 4 talks about the appointment of officers of customs. Section 5 talks about the powers of the officers of customs, and section 6 talks about entrustment of functions of the board and custom officers on certain other officers. So this chapter contains 4 sections and we go over each of these sections in detail. The first section, that is section 3, talks about classes of officers of customs. What does the section say? There shall be the following classes of officers of customs: Principal Chief Commissioners of Customs, or Principal Chief Commissioner of Customs Preventive, or Principal Director General of Revenue Intelligence. So right here in section 3 it tells you that there would be 3 separate verticals. One would be customs as we understand it, the second would be preventive, and the third would be revenue intelligence. A principal commissioner would be known as a principal director general when we use the word revenue intelligence, and a principal commissioner of customs into bracket preventive would tell us that this person is the head of the preventive wing. The other classes would be Chief Commissioners of Customs, or Chief Commissioners of Customs Preventive, or Director General of Revenue Intelligence. After the Chief Commissioners come the Principal Commissioners, or Principal Commissioners of Customs Preventive, or Principal Additional Director General of Revenue Intelligence, and at this stage they introduce the 4th vertical, that is Principal Commissioner of Customs Audit. So the audit stops at the Principal Commissioner of Customs, whereas Customs Preventive and Revenue Intelligence goes 2 stages above the Principal Commissioner of Customs. Thereafter it would be Commissioner of Customs, or Commissioner of Customs Preventive, or Additional Director General of Revenue Intelligence, or Commissioner of Customs Audit. Parallel to this would be Principal Commissioner of Customs Appeals. And as we go ahead, we will see that the powers of the Principal Commissioner of Customs Appeals and the Commissioner of Customs Appeals are limited to certain sections or chapters of the Customs Act, and they do not go across the entire Customs Act. After this would be the Commissioner of Customs Appeals. Below this comes the Additional Commissioner of Customs, Additional Commissioner of Customs Preventive, Additional Commissioner of Customs Audit, or Additional Director of Revenue Intelligence. Below the additional would be the Joint Commissioner of Customs, Joint Commissioner of Customs Preventive, or Joint Director of Revenue Intelligence, or the Joint Commissioner of Customs Audit. Below the Joint Commissioners would come the Deputy Commissioner of Customs, or the Deputy Commissioner of Customs Preventive, or the Director General of Revenue Intelligence, or Deputy Commissioner of Customs Audit. Below the Deputy Commissioner would come the Assistant Commissioner of Customs, or the Assistant Commissioner of Customs Preventive, or Assistant Director of Revenue Intelligence, or Assistant Commissioner of Customs Audit. And then we have a residual clause which says such other officers of customs as may be appointed for the purposes of this act. Here they do not talk about who will appoint them. They just say appointed for the purposes of this act. Section 4.2 states very clearly that the board, without prejudice to the provisions of subsection 1, may authorize a Principal Chief Commissioner of Customs or Chief Commissioner of Customs or a Principal Commissioner of Customs or Commissioner of Customs or a Joint or Assistant Commissioner of Customs or Deputy Commissioner of Customs to appoint officers of customs below the rank of Assistant Commissioner. So till the Assistant Commissioner it would be appointed by the board, and officers below the Assistant Commissioner can be appointed by an officer authorized by the board. Section 5 talks about the powers of the customs officer, and this very interestingly brings us to proper officer. The entire Customs Act is configured in a manner that the proper officer is a very important concept in Indian customs. Whoever has the authority to take a particular action, whoever is responsible to take that particular action, is called the proper officer for that particular activity. What does section 5, powers of officers of customs, say? It says, subject to such conditions and limitations as the board may impose, an officer of customs may exercise the powers and discharge the duties conferred or imposed on him under this act. It further says, without prejudice to the provisions contained in subsection 1, the board may by notification assign such functions as it may deem fit to an officer who shall be the proper officer in relation to such functions. Section 5.1.2 states, within their jurisdiction assigned by the board, the Principal Commissioner of Customs or Commissioner of Customs, as the case may be, may by order assign such functions as he may deem fit to an officer of customs who shall be the proper officer in relation to such functions. Section 5 subsection 2 reads as, an officer of customs may exercise the powers and discharge the duties conferred or imposed under this act on any other officer of customs who is subordinate to him. You must read this section 5.2 very carefully. For those of us who are undertaking custom clearance, it means that if an superintendent or an appraiser is not available for assessment, we can go to an assistant commissioner or a deputy commissioner and request him to assess it. Request him to give the out of charge. If the inspector is not available or the examiner is not available, we can ask the superintendent or the appraiser to undertake the functions of the examiner or the inspector who is subordinate to him. Section 5.3 further reads as, notwithstanding anything contained in this section, a commissioner appeals shall not exercise the powers and discharge the duties conferred or imposed on an officer of customs other than those specified in chapter 15 and section 108 and subsections of section 110. Chapter 15 of the Customs Act talks about appeals and revision, and section 108 talks about powers to summons people and submission of documents, and section 110 talks about seizure of documents, goods and things. So here you will see very clearly that section 5.3 limits the powers of Commissioner Appeals, and by an extension of this to every officer who is working in appeals at that point in time subordinate to the Commissioner of Customs Appeals. Section 5.4 reads as, in specifying the conditions and limitations referred to subsection and in assigning functions under the subsection, the board may consider any one of the following or more criteria, including but not limited to. This specific amendment was brought in to cover faceless assessment, to facilitate faster clearances, to make custom clearance and processing much easier. What are the criteria? Territorial jurisdiction, person or persons or class of persons, goods or class of goods, cases or class of cases, computer assigned random assignment, any other criteria as the board may by notification specify. Section 5, subsection 5 further reads as, the board may by notification and whenever necessary or appropriate require 2 or more officers of customs, whether or not of the same class, to have concurrent powers and functions to be performed under this act. Section 6 of this chapter reads as, entrustment of the functions of the board and custom officers on certain other officers. So this is primarily to cover special circumstances when custom needs to call upon certain other officers to help them in the implementation and discharge of functions under the Customs Act. What does this read as? The central government, so this can be done only by the central government, may by notification in the official gazette entrust either conditionally or unconditionally to any officer of the central government or the state government or a local authority any functions of the board or any officer of the customs under this act. So this chapter 2 covers 4 sections, section 3 to section 6, which read as, section 3, classes of officers of customs, section 4, appointment of officers of customs, section 5, powers of officers of customs, and section 6, entrustment of functions of the board and custom officers on certain other officers.
For detailed learning of all logistics subjects, visit www.logiveda.com.